Welcome to Cyber Threat Intel, your go-to source for the latest updates, news, and insights on cyber threats. Our goal is to arm you with the knowledge to protect yourself in the digital age, whether you're a cybersecurity professional or just curious about the threats lurking in the digital shadows. Make sure to subscribe now on YouTube or your favorite podcast listening platform to join us on the front lines of cybersecurity, because in the world of cyber threats, knowledge is power. Welcome. This is Cyber Threat Intel. I'm your host, John Good. This is Thursday. It's June 20th, 2024, and this is episode number 54. If this is the first time that you're joining the show or checking out the content, glad to see you here. If you're returning from another episode or some other content, glad to see you returning. Get your fix of Cyber Threat Intel. With that being said, if you need to grab a snack or a drink to get you through the content, go ahead and do that before we keep going. And then if you want to see the articles that we cover in the episode or previous episodes, head on over to cyberthreatintel.com. Again, cyberthreatintel.com. You can find all that information there. With that being said, let's go ahead and flip on over to my screen and hop into the content. All right, so first article here, data breach. Total Fitness exposed almost 500,000 people's photos. UK-based gym chain Total Fitness has been accused of sloppy security following the discovery of an unsecured database containing the images of 470,000 members and staff, all accessible to anyone on the internet with no password required. A 47.7 gigabyte database belonging to the health club was discovered by cybersecurity researcher Jeremiah Fowler, who told the Register he had also uncovered images of members' identity documents, banking and payment card details, phone numbers, and even, in some cases, immigration records. That's some pretty sensitive information. Interesting. There's a quote here. It says, nearly all social media accounts offer users the ability to have a private profile and have strict control over who can access their content. However, this doesn't seem to be the case for member-uploaded images on Total Fitness platform, said Fowler. It is hypothetically possible that the images stored in the backend of the backend database are potentially retained even after being deleted by the member. This would potentially explain why the database contained images of sensitive documents. Yeah, I mean, that seems like a reasonable conclusion. For sure, it's interesting just the scope of the documents that is available, and especially with no password, that's just bad security 101. They go ahead and they show an image here of some examples of what you could find on this platform, which, again, pretty sensitive information. We know driver's license, Visa payment card, a debit card, Barclays card, immigration stuff. So a lot of sensitive information that you don't really want exposed. Total Fitness has disputed the extent of the data breach, claiming that members' images only comprise a subset of the database and that most images did not contain personally identifiable information. So essentially, they're trying to downplay the information that's out there. Most of the stuff didn't even include PII, even though some of it did. We know that some of it did, but not all of it, not most of it. It's fine. So that is an interesting defense. While Total Fitness claims there's no evidence of unauthorized access to the database, aside from that by Fowler, it's clear that the potential for abuse was definitely present. The exposed images could be used for a number of criminal pursuits, including identity theft, romance scams, or even the creation of deep fakes. And I'm sure there's plenty of other things that could maybe come out of this as well. But that's one of the things that you have to realize in an organization is this whole idea of what data are you consuming? What data are you processing? What data are you storing? How are you using that data? Where does that data reside? What kind of testing is going against the controls that protect that data? Especially when it starts to be more sensitive data, passport information, healthcare information, immigration status, all those kinds of things. What does your security look like for that? And that starts with understanding what data you're actually taking in, because then you can start to diagram the data flow and understand that flow. And then that way you can also start to protect that flow of data from start to finish. It's not enough to just put some initial controls in place. In this case, they didn't even have a password in place, so you could just go access it and see everything. And it doesn't matter if that data is old data or whatever, if it's sensitive data, especially, that's going to be of concern always. A lot of that data and these kinds of things that people have in these photos probably aren't things that are going to change all that often. So, credit card details and all of those other items that we talked about. So, you have a responsibility as a company to understand that workflow, and you are asking them to provide certain information. So, how are you going to protect that? How are you going to make sure that that's not accessible to the outside world? And then, if it is available to the outside world, can you actually identify if people have accessed that? Because once you figure out that you've done that, especially if it's inadvertently or unintentionally, can you look at the logs and see that people have accessed it, or identify who's accessed it, identify if that information's been taken? All of those things matter. But again, it starts with understanding the data that you're taking in and that flow from start to finish. So that data lifecycle. Next article here, federal contractors pay multi-million-dollar settlements over cybersecurity lapses. 2 federal contractors have paid a total of $11.3 million in civil penalties to the U.S. government after admitting they failed to properly test the cybersecurity of a system for providing financial assistance to low-income people in New York during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Department of Justice said Monday that the agreement with Guidehouse Inc. and Nan McKay and Associates resolves allegations that they violated the False Claims Act, a law more than a century old that's intended to protect the government from contractors who misrepresent the quality of their services. Beginning in May 2021, they set up an emergency rental assistance program, ERAP, for the State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, OTDA. It went live on June 1st of that year. Then, and this is a quote, 12 hours later, OTDA shut down the ERAP website after determining that certain applicants' personal identifiable information, their PII, had been compromised and portions were available on the internet. Wonder if they had password protecting it, so the DOJ said. And the password part is just a comment referencing that previous article. It doesn't say that in this article. Guidehouse and Nan McKay acknowledged that had either of them conducted the contractually required cybersecurity testing, the conditions that resulted in the information security breach may have been detected and the incident prevented. That's a good point, especially when you're contractually required to do certain kinds of testing. How did that get through without evaluating that that testing had been done? Typically what happens on a lot of these, especially government systems that are a lot of times dealing with the NIST risk management framework, is in order to be considered things like FISMA certified and these other certifications that the governments have, is that you have to be evaluated by somebody from the government to actually give you their stamp of approval and say, yes, you are meeting the expectations that we have put before you. You're meeting the contractual requirements that go along with processing government-related data. So it's interesting in that sense that wouldn't have been caught as a finding, because usually something substantial like that would be caught as a finding, and it would be something that you would have to answer to. You'd have to maybe give a POAM, which is a plan of action, a milestone. Basically, it's a tracking mechanism saying, I will fix this within 90 days or whatever it is, whatever the requirement is. And sometimes if it's severe enough, you cannot get that stamp of approval from the government until that is completed. So I would be interested to hear more about this as far as, again, how that got through the process without identifying that, because that seems also like a little bit of due diligence or lack of due diligence by whoever their evaluator was or assessor was of their security controls. So very interesting. As part of the settlement, Guidehouse also admitted that for a short time period in 2021, it used a third-party data cloud software program to store personally identifiable information without first obtaining OTDA's permission in violation of its contract. Again, when you have these assessors that look at your systems and your networks for the government, they are approving a certain security boundary, accreditation boundary. And so when you do things that change that, that certainly needs to be reevaluated. There's a lot of vendors that are approved for government usage that you could use to do things like storing cloud data or storing data in the cloud or things like that. But you have to obviously use somebody that's approved to do that, and it has to be evaluated and all those kinds of things. So again, I'm just curious how this got through. But certainly they seem to be taking the blame for it, because at the end of the day, it is their fault. They didn't do it, and they are going to pay the consequences, suffer the consequences. Next article, G7 to develop cybersecurity framework for energy sector. The G7 nations will develop a collective cybersecurity framework for operational technologies and energy systems aimed at both manufacturers and operators. The framework aims to strengthen the cybersecurity of the global supply chain of key technologies used to manage and operate electricity, oil, and natural gas systems across the world. Sullivan commented, energy systems around the world face continuous cyber attacks and are vulnerable to disruption. As new digital clean energy technologies are integrated, we must ensure that they are cyber secure to prevent destruction or disruption in services. So when it comes to critical infrastructure, things like energy, power grids, water plant systems, all those kinds of things, sanitization systems, all those really important kind of core things that we need in order for us to have a well-functioning society, a clean society, all those kinds of things. Those are definitely coming into the cyber lens, if you will. A lot of people are starting to focus on the cybersecurity around that stuff, because we're finding that, especially in some other countries, they've had their power grids or power systems tampered with and disrupted. But we're finding that through analysis that if that happens to us, that is a substantial concern that could cripple the country, our country, any of these other nations that are in G7. So it's important that we look at that supply chain. We look at the technologies that are being used, they're being implemented, how all of this stuff is being created, and how it is being architected. All those things matter. If the power grid goes down, it's going to be a bad time. G7 is an intergovernmental political and economic forum consisting of some of the world's largest economies. So if you don't know who's in it, it's Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US. So a whole bunch of large organizations are in G7, and that would certainly affect the global landscape across the world, seeing as how those are definitely major players in the global economy. Coinciding with the G7 announcement, the U.S. Department of Energy, DOE, released a new set of supply chain cybersecurity principles. These principles characterize the foundational actions and approaches needed to deliver strong cybersecurity throughout the vast global supply chains that build energy, automation, and industrial control systems, ICSs. The principles condense a range of international cybersecurity regulations, frameworks, and guidance into 20 high-level objectives energy suppliers and manufacturers can use to align best practices in supply chain cybersecurity. So that is one thing that you'll see in different organizations, is that just because things are best practices doesn't mean that people are always following those. And certainly if you can have some way of requiring that or mandating that, that is great. Obviously, from a mandate or a legislation kind of standpoint, you want to be careful to not over-regulate, because if everything that you implement as far as a law, regulation, things like that, that is going to cause companies to incur costs in almost every situation. Maybe they need more headcount, maybe they need certain technologies. And so you have to be careful to not make it so stringent that companies cannot be flexible to meet their how their business operates and their ability as a business, because ultimately you don't want them to just stop creating things because they can't financially afford it. It's not economical to to actually buy some of the technologies or whatever that are needed to meet the controls. So, but it is a good thing to see this for the critical infrastructure, for the energy environments or the energy companies, ICSs, all those kinds of things. I think it's a good thing. We've been laxed for way too long, really, on ICS systems and kind of just let things go. But now we're finding that that is that's a disaster waiting to happen, right? It's the quiet, the calm before the storm. I don't know. There isn't some precursor, but it's definitely something that we have to look at, because it is something that if we don't focus on and we don't improve, that in the long term, it will certainly come back to bite us. All right, next article, Australian regulator blames lack of multi-factor authentication for MetaBank hack. Australia's data protection regulator reveals in court documents that the 2022 attack on health insurance provider MetaBank was likely caused by a lack of multi-factor authentication, allowing hackers to access the company's IT systems. As a result of the MetaBank hack, the attackers leaked and published on the dark web the personal data of 9.7 million current and former customers, including sensitive information about their illnesses, disabilities, or injuries. According to the report released this week by the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, the OAIC, the attack was likely caused because the company neglected basic cybersecurity measures, including requiring its workers to use multi-factor authentication to log into its VPN. Given the nature of the volume of the data MetaBank stores and collects and the risk of harm for an individual in case of a breach, it was reasonable for the company to adopt security measures recommended by Australia's privacy regulator prior to the attack, according to court documents. So this whole idea of not using multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication is quite present in today's news. We've had several breaches as of late, as of the last couple years, I would say even, of companies just not implementing multi-factor authentication or not requiring it, not checking and making sure their users are using it for whatever situations, for critical applications or VPNs in this case. And that is certainly a concern. Again, I've said this before in another episode. I think we're going to start seeing more and more companies shift towards this idea of forcing multi-factor authentication by default. So you log in, you create an account, whatever, you are automatically forced to enable multi-factor authentication. I think that's a good step in the right direction. Certainly, it does create one more obstacle as far as your setup and your onboarding of users and all those kinds of things. But it's just one of those things that you have to do. It's no longer acceptable to just protect your applications and data and systems and networks by simply a username and password. It's just not acceptable. And if you continue to do that, you're going to suffer a similar consequence, most likely, as these other companies, because password reuse is rampant among all organizations, like all users everywhere. So that is definitely a thing. And a lot of times, their password's out there already in a data breach. It just takes one attacker to find that username through some OSINT and, go to town and get into your network. According to the report, the attack on MetaBank is traced to an IT service desk operator for a contractor who used a personal browser profile on a work computer. His credentials were then synced to his home computer, which hackers infected with information stealing malware, obtaining access to all the saved passwords in his browser, including those that provided access to MetaBank admin accounts. So that's certainly dangerous right there. In particular, the threat actor was able to authenticate and log on to MetaBank's Global Protect VPN using only the MetaBank credentials because the company did not require 2 or more proofs of identity or multi-factor authentication, the report said. And it's saying the company could face a potential fine of more than $21 trillion. $21 trillion. No! It's a lot of money. So I think this is one of the worst things here. This idea that your VPN is only protected by a username and password. You don't have to put in a 2-factor authentication code or multi-factor authentication code. And that alone is a dangerous thing because we know passwords aren't that secure. Even if you make the passwords longer, attackers are getting good at getting those passwords compromised. Or if quantum computing starts really picking up over the next couple of years, then that's going to be very trivial to take care of to crack those passwords. But at least if you have that password, that's one step. And then you add the multi-factor authentication, which adds a randomness to that extra code, that second step, that is very unlikely to be guessed, because the thing is, that code rotates every 30 seconds or 60 seconds or whatever the interval is. And so that speeds up that process significantly. And then if you were combining that with account lockout procedures and controls and things like that, password rotation, preventing using the same password for the last 24 times or something, all of those things contribute to just making your environment more secure. The really basic password controls, security controls, that just should be implemented. All right, next article here. Warning, Marco Polo scam targeting crypto users via fake meeting software. Threat actor who goes by the alias Marco Polo has been identified as behind a large-scale cross-platform scam that targets digital currency users on social media with information stealer malware and carries out cryptocurrency theft. The attack chain involves the use of the purported virtual meeting software named Vortex and 23 other apps that are used as a conduit to deliver Romantheus, SteelC, and Atomic macOS Stealer, AMOS, Recorded Futures Insect Group said in an analysis published this week. This is a quote. This campaign, primarily targeting cryptocurrency users, marks a significant rise in the macOS security threats and reveals an expansive network of malicious applications, the cybersecurity company noted, describing Marco Polo as agile, adaptable, and versatile. A crucial aspect of the malicious operation is its attempt to legitimize Vortex on social media and the internet, with the actors maintaining a dedicated Medium blog filled with suspected AI-generated articles, as well as a verified account on X, formerly Twitter, carrying a gold checkmark. So they're putting out propaganda around this software, around this malware, to make it seem like, hey, yeah, this is legitimate. There's all this information out there, because you don't typically see a lot of detailed articles or information about malware in the positive light, because I'm sure all these articles are phrased in a positive light to make you think that, yes, this is good, right? You should use whatever this is. You should use this virtual meeting software. Downloading the booby-trapped application requires victims to provide a room ID, a unique identifier to a meeting invitation that's propagated via replies to the Vortex account, direct messages, and cryptocurrency-related Discord and Telegram channels. Once a user enters a necessary room ID on the Vortex website, they're redirected to a Dropbox link. That should be a warning sign right there. Or an external website that stages an installer for the software, which ultimately leads to the deployment of the stealer malware. And it says, according to details shared by crypto researcher Zach XBT on X, formerly Twitter, last week, an unnamed individual is said to have lost $245,000 after falling victim to the Vortex scam. So $245,000, I mean, this is, that's a substantial amount for a lot of people. And certainly that does make this a very real scenario. It's not like this person's made like $10 on this scam. $245,000 from one person. Especially when you're going after crypto. I mean, you're certainly going after a certain demographic of people that are willing to invest in something other than stock equities. And I'm just going to venture out there and guess that a lot of people investing in crypto do have interest in tech, maybe work in tech, things like that. So it's likely that they have an elevated income compared to a lot of other people. That's just an assumption. I don't have any stats behind that, but that definitely seems like that is consistent a lot of times with people that are speaking of crypto or talking about investing in crypto. So there's definitely a lot of money in crypto, especially if you have malware that can help exfiltrate that. We've seen that over the years, more and more crypto scams and things like that to target those users specifically. So with that being said, that's the last article for today. Again, this is Cyber Threat Intel. I'm your host, John Good. This is episode number 54, and it's Thursday, June 20th, 2024. If you want to see all the articles that we covered in this episode or other episodes, head on over to cyberthreatintel.com. Again, cyberthreatintel.com. That's our website, and you can find all the information there. But with that being said, we're going to wrap it up for today, and I'll see you in the next one. See you later. Are you tired of overpaying for cybersecurity training? Are you interested in training from industry professionals? Are you looking for cybersecurity career services? If you answered yes to any of those questions, then cybertrainingpro.com is the perfect platform for you. At Cybertraining Pro, we're a one-stop shop for all your cybersecurity needs. We can train you for industry certifications or just improve your overall knowledge and skills in a certain area. Unlike other platforms, we don't stop there. We can also coach you throughout your career, practice your interview skills, or create a high-performing resume with our career services. Cybertrainingpro.com isn't just another training platform. Students get exclusive access to our private community where we go beyond training courses to provide additional content, tips and tricks, and engagement with both other students and staff. Look, by the year 2025, there could be as many as 3.5 million job openings in cybersecurity. With so much opportunity, why not maximize your career potential with a platform that cares about your success? Come join us at cybertrainingpro.com and start building your future today.